there is a significant degree of uncertainty. I think that still really is the characteristic that we all in the industry are dealing with on a day in and day out basis. And so therefore, again, visibility and flexibility continue to be the most important commodities that we need to populate our days with.
We must all assume that 2021 is going to be better than 2020. I think that's a good place for all of us to start.
Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us on the Back in Business webinar, a 10-part series where we deep dive into the various sectors that have been contributing to the GCC economies. We are here to get a glimpse of what industry leaders are doing to restart their businesses. In order to understand where we're going, we need to take cognizance of what we've been through and where we're at. The impact of COVID-19 and its fallout in 2020 has been compared to the 2007-2008 financial crisis on multiple occasions, and for good reason. Even prior to the lockdowns, before precautionary measures were put in place in the Middle East, the construction sector had already begun to feel the effects of the pandemic. As we move into the fourth quarter of 2020, the construction sector is now moving back in business as stakeholders begin to digest the new normal. Today, we discuss the future of the GCC construction sector. And joining us are Mike Reininger, the CEO of the Qiddiya investment company, which is driving the development of Saudi Arabia's capital of entertainment, sports, and the arts, as well as Greg Kane, the CEO of WSP in the Middle East, which is one of the world's leading engineering professional services consulting firms that designs lasting solutions in the property and buildings, transportation and infrastructure, industry, resources, and power and energy sectors. Mike, would you like to begin with an overview of what it has been like to return to offices after working remotely for a number of weeks in 2020?
Sure. Thank you, Anup. Listen, it goes without saying that we are all in a situation where we're dealing with things that were not predicted and were unprecedented. So there wasn't really a roadmap for exactly the right way or the best way to deal with these things. I would say that we have been in some ways in a relatively fortunate situation, just given where we are in the life cycle of our business and our project, that we're really at the very beginning stages of the design, engineering, and construction process. It might have been different for us had we been further along in the maturation of the project. But for sure, we got off to a great start, so to speak, with adapting to the situation, really on the backs of two things. A lot of appreciation goes out first to our own internal information technology team, who really quickly made sure that we had the right platform and reliability and access to everyone in the company that physically made it possible to do their job day in and day out without having to be in the office. And they were remarkable at how professional and effective they were in getting that to happen before everybody left the office to begin with. And then secondly, our team exhibited a remarkable ability to adapt to those different circumstances and to develop new habits that allowed things to move forward on a day in and day out basis. I will also say that it also required an enormous amount of additional communication on the part of the company and the leaders of the company in order to help those things happen. Because when you're not in daily contact with one another and you don't have the advantage of sort of incidental bumping into each other, information simply doesn't flow as naturally and as simply as it otherwise would. You overlay on top of that all kinds of uncertainties, personal life uncertainties, professional life uncertainties, and it increases anxiety. And the only way that you ultimately overcome that kind of anxiety is through constant communication and reiteration of information that wouldn't otherwise get distributed naturally. So you have to do it through this increase of communication. And we relied heavily on that, especially in the earlier times of this new situation.
Thanks for sharing that, Mike. Greg, what is your take on returning to offices after working remotely for a time during the lockdown?
I think our perspective, and maybe slightly different, a lot of similarities to what Mike just talked through. A lot of what Mike said there resonates. A little bit different for us insofar as about 70% of our people are either based on a construction site or in a client's project office. And for most of our projects, they continued through late March, April, May. So a lot of our people continued going to the workplace, being construction site. In the UAE, construction was deemed critical. Most of our projects in Kuwait and even in Saudi, most of our projects continued through April, May. Now, that brought with it its own challenges. I think if we look at where we are today, there's a lot more understanding. We've found our working rhythm. We've developed our practices. I think late March, early April was very reactionary. There was a lot of anxiety around the pandemic. There was a lot of uncertainty. People didn't really know what we were dealing with. So those early weeks and months of the pandemic were a real challenge, particularly for our site-based people. For our office-based people, such as myself, we all retreated to our home offices and spare bedrooms. And whilst it was a challenge, it was a much more surmountable challenge. For our people going to construction sites, they had to find a new way of working, implement new health and safety guidelines, be very rigorous. Every project is different demands. How you make access up into a 80-story tower safe versus a very wide horizontal infrastructure project is very, very different. So we had quite a hectic, I would say, late March, April and May. It was almost like a mini crisis. Twice a day, you were dealing with new things. However, our people, and to Mike's point, and this has been incredibly heartening for us, and I'm sure many people in the industry would say, our people have been incredibly resilient, incredibly adaptable. And I think if we find some silver linings in this, we have demonstrated to ourselves as an industry, this is not a WSP, this is an industry, what we can achieve and what we can keep doing. And if we look at productivity, so at the end of the day, that's what we're here to do. We're here to deliver projects. And if we look at productivity, we've had a couple of small fits here and there. We've responded, reacted, made changes, and we have largely, as an industry, kept delivering our projects. And I think as an industry, that's something to be incredibly proud of, that adaptability and that resilience. And yes, the pandemic is still with us. And yes, there's still a healthcare risk. But I've found certainly amongst our people, we are just getting on with delivering our projects and remaining output orientated, remaining delivery orientated, and dealing with the little surprises that come up day by day. But we've definitely now got into our rhythm and found a way of working, and we're finding ways to continue to deliver.
That sounds extremely positive, Greg, but it also brings us to our next question. Mike, what are the challenges that the construction sector has overcome or needs to overcome in order to achieve a semblance of normalcy in Saudi Arabia, if you can even call it a semblance of normalcy?
Yeah, so for us, as Greg mentioned, we happen to be one of those right now, at least, very large horizontal infrastructure projects, and so again, that's one of the things that we're actually fortunate around, because when it comes to the most basic of issues of safety that you could translate into social distancing, for the most part, we have the optimal social distancing machine, one operator, one piece of heavy equipment in a cab, right? So there's the kind of separation that is endemic to sort of success is built into what we're doing right now. That won't be the case forever, but for the immediate term, that's been the bulk of what we're doing, which gave us an ability to implement some pretty important but ultimately basic protocols around temperature checking and personal protective equipment and those sorts of things in order to make sure that the blocking and tackling of safety procedures was very diligently and rigorously implemented across our site. As a result of that, we lost very little productivity, and we never lost a day of sort of activity on the site. As we look forward, there are going to be different things, right? That depending on not the last 6 months, but the next 6 months, we're going to be facing things like impacts from global supply chains, right? It's it's true that in many parts of the world, production has just recently resumed in factories and in those sorts of things. If there is a hiccup in that process that sets it back, we'll all start to feel the ramifications of simply not being able to get the things that you need in the quantity that you need them, where they're required to keep projects going. That's setting aside projects that may wind up on entirely different timeframes as a result of the backstory economic conditions that are underlying those individual businesses. So there is a significant degree of uncertainty, I think, that still really is the characteristic that we all in the industry are dealing with on a day in and day out basis. And so therefore, again, visibility and flexibility continue to be the most important commodities that we need to populate our days with.
Greg, would you like to weigh in on this discussion? Are there challenges that you have faced and have had to overcome given this period?
Look, there's definite challenges. Our place in the industry, if I look at it through our lens, we either bring work to people or we bring people to work. So when we bring work to people, that's the design part of our business, and those people can work safely now in an office. I'm in the office today, and there's people here today, or they can even work from home, as we demonstrated through particularly April and May. Bringing people to work where we need to get to sites and we need to get to construction fronts, whether it's in a project management role or if it's in a construction supervision role, that remains a challenge just because of travel. Travel restrictions around the region, the visa restrictions, which they're all well thought out and they all make logical sense in their own isolated considerations. But getting people to work remains a challenge. Now, my hope and my expectation is that's not something that will persist for a very long time. We see with the weeks and months passing that it becomes easier. So once we get past that, the new normal, I suppose, needs to be defined, and it's a bit of a buzzword. And what is the new normal? And I do feel that there are things that we have embraced in the last couple of months, and some of which will be here to stay. I think there's ways in which we work and socialize that are potentially changed for a very long time. I don't believe they'll be changed to the extreme that we've seen over the last few months. At the end of the day, we will all once upon a time get back on airplanes. We'll go and visit cities. We'll want to travel. We'll stay in hotels. How long will it take to get back to that? And to what extent, I think, is what needs to be figured out. For us, we are not trying to predict the future. I think that's a very difficult thing to do. As I said previously, we're remaining delivery focused, output focused. And I think, as I said, we've learned a lot about what's possible. And I don't believe that what we're currently doing is the new normal, but I've seen improvements in productivity, in efficiency, in the uptake of technology, in our organization, other organizations that I think ultimately will stand our industry well going out into the future. I think we're doing things now in a more clever way, more efficient way than we were previously. And, I could give you lots of examples of triple copies of paper documents that needed to be driven across town, to be stamped, to be driven back across town. And now we're just PDFing documents with signed comments on, just simple things like that. But the industry has embraced this now. And I think some of these things will be here to stay.
You've touched upon a lot of very key points there, Greg, and I think Mike touched upon it too. Greg, I'm going to keep you on the hot seat in terms of productivity. Do you feel that there has been a recognizable impact on productivity and employee culture? And if you could share a few more examples of how it is, especially in an industry that's continuously lagged in the adoption of technology. We've been forced, in a way, to adopt this technology and better our processes. If you could share a few more examples on the impact that this situation that we're in has had on productivity and employee culture.
Yeah, so productivity, if I look at technology, I would like to think that we were always quite well advanced in our embrace of technology. Some people have talked about the digital transformation, which for some firms has been embracing Microsoft Teams. We were on Teams long ago, Skype before that, Link before that. We've always had a good, robust IT infrastructure. We've always had a work from home culture. So speaking of culture, we've always given people an IT setup at home if they want to have 3 screens and docking stations. We've always facilitated that. So the change to working from home for a lot of our people was pretty straightforward. We had the technology in place, we had the file servers, all that was already there. So that was not a huge challenge for us. Some individuals had to upgrade their home internet, no more than that. So productivity, I think, has been maintained, and in some respects, we've become more efficient. The typical meeting when you meet in someone's office, it's supposed to start at 11, people come in at 5 past, you get going at 10 past, people talk, and it runs for an hour and a half. Now, a Microsoft Teams meeting that's supposed to start at 11, everyone's there at 11, it gets done in 20 minutes, and you say goodbye. So in many respects, the day has become more intense, and there's more crammed into the day. So I don't think productivity has been, for us, an issue. And if I remain output focused, our outputs have held up and we've delivered. Culture is the one area where, for someone like us, we're a professional services business. So we're literally, people are our assets. So culture is hugely important. And there is an element of culture that does require proximity for it to be fostered and maintained. And culture is about learned behaviors and learned habits. And that does require a degree of proximity. So I do have a slight, maybe concern is too strong a word, that if this continues too far out into the future, what happens to your corporate culture? And that's true for any business. Particularly when you think of attrition, new joiners coming in, does your culture survive on Microsoft Teams? And I think we're not quite ready to answer that question. I do have some concerns about that.
What about you, Mike? Are you seeing similar patterns in Saudi Arabia as well? Have you seen an impact on productivity and employee culture? Has there been much of a change, or do you see a slight improvement on the baseline? Has the baseline lifted a bit because of the situation that we're in right now?
Yeah, so it's actually a pretty interesting question. It's one that we think a lot about. First of all, most of the platforms and the behaviors and the policies and procedures that we've moved to, as most people around the world have moved to, in and of themselves are not innovative, particularly new or groundbreaking. They're things that have more or less been around for a while and have been on an adoption pattern that was maybe a little bit slower. Out of necessity, our reliance and the pace of adoption of those technologies and platforms and behaviors has been accelerated for lack of any other option to turn to, right? So in this case, necessity was the mother of adoption, so to speak, as opposed to invention. And in fact, there are certain things that we have all discovered are more efficient and more effective by using these technologies and these practices. But I would not say that it's necessarily a one size fits all kind of solution here. The unanswered question is, in the future, which of these directional shifts will ultimately stick, and which of our behaviors will we tend to move back towards when another alternative is available to us? And I think it may be a little bit too early to tell on that at this particular moment. But at the end of the day, I think there are going to be a number of factors that are going to weigh into that, including economics of the particular practice or the situation, including what the other alternatives are and what are their effective ratios sort of relative to the task at hand. And I think importantly, what the core need of a business is. That there are some things that are just better served, in my view, without the aid of sort of electronic media. In our case, we're a startup company. We're entering into industries that are brand new into the marketplace, and in those cases, the value of interaction, particularly of young people that aren't fully experienced, that don't have the background of the way it used to be or how it could be, those things come through interpersonal contact. We are also heavily engaged in highly creative exercises. And if you excuse the metaphor, there is a bandwidth loss in creative activities when you depersonalize it, or you're solely reliant on electronic media as your primary, method of communication. And so not everything will survive, in a more electronic / digital / efficient, quote unquote, methodology. If other alternatives, become more viable again. And so we're watching and learning to see which of those things make the most sense for the long term, and which things, we might want to snap back to in some modified form, when it becomes a possibility.
Which raises another interesting topic for discussion, which is the increased focus on health and safety now that we are so far away from personal interactions, not just in terms of physical health, but also mental health. Greg, could you share your thoughts on how the industry's viewpoints on HSE practices are changing?
So look, I think in the last couple of years, we've seen a big focus on mental health, globally, and our industries talks more about it, and that's a great thing. It's been a focus for us, WSP, for the last couple of years as well, and making sure that people know that it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to speak up. We trained, I think it was 50 mental health first aiders in the last 2 years, people in WSP that people can go and talk to. Now, when you get into a pandemic type situation like we've been in, and then the resultant recession, that brings all sorts of anxieties and personal challenges for people, and financial concerns, and all of those other things that cause people to be anxious. As a business, we have limited control over those things. But what we do, or what we have tried to do in the last couple of months, is to make sure we're not putting too much pressure on people. These are challenging times. We're all having to work in ways that we're maybe not familiar with. We're all having to deal with variables maybe that we've not seen before. So just making sure the pressure that we put on people is measured, and we're checking in on people. And when we do a Teams call and you see someone's face, you ask them the question, hey, how are you doing? So that has been a heightened, and particularly periods during lockdown, and I think it was back in April, when people were at home, particularly people living by themselves, locked in their home, working, not really having any social interaction. That was a real challenge. And we had very real examples of people who very understandingly struggled through that period. And when we reopened offices, those guys, some of them couldn't get back here quick enough just to have the sense of normalcy of getting dressed, driving to work, and seeing people. In terms of physical health and safety, obviously you've got all the precautions we've had to put in place around PPE, around hand sanitizers. Everyone's done that. But I was on a construction site last week. We do what we call site leadership safety tours, where the leadership is about 10 of us. We go on sites and we walk around, and we'll walk with our senior most person. And they've been harder to do for a whole variety of reasons. One, you don't want to be visiting multiple sites and potentially being a contamination risk. You don't want to be overburdening your team with unnecessary distractions at challenging times. But also just the challenges around travel, getting to the different countries around the region. But I was on a site last week, a 75-story tower, which had 3,000 operatives in it, and I was there at shift change. Now, you try and take 3,000 operatives out of a tower construction site at shift change, and it's really, really challenging. And the best efforts of the contractor, who I think has done a superb job, the best efforts of their team, and the best efforts of the workers themselves, it's just a real challenge. And as if building a tower that's 75 stories high is not hard enough, you've now got these additional challenges and additional constraints. So, contractors, clients, PNCs, we have to make sure that we take due cognizance of the extra time, effort. And, in a pandemic like this, we just cannot cut corners. And I'm delighted to say the site that I was on has not had a COVID case, I think, for about 10 weeks. So whatever it is they're doing is clearly working. But it's a huge additional burden, particularly on contractors, to manage this across our construction sites. And it's not going to go away anytime quickly, until we get past vaccine. This is going to remain a challenge for construction industry. And Mike was talking about a more horizontal spread out, and we've got some projects like that. It's a little bit easier as soon as you get into the building assets and you get into close quarters. If you ever see how a hotel room is fit out in a hotel and the different trades, and you've got one guy doing tiling and another guy putting in the bath, this is a real challenge for the industry, so we must stay on top of it.
Which brings us to an interesting point, because we at Construction Week tend to look at numbers. We see safe man hours without LTI as one of the key numbers. in a project. But we've seen that during this period, HSE has gone way beyond looking at numbers. Mike, do you think that you agree with that? Right? Have you seen issues that you faced, in not just in terms of physical but mental health as well? And how has HSE advanced over time? And are these HSE practices here to stay?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question again in the context of what we're doing, because in so many ways the Qiddiya project is a pioneer in opening up all kinds of things within the context of a new industry, right? New methods of doing things, new kinds of opportunities across the board. And so HSE for us is just another one of the many things where we start with a fresh piece of paper. We see what is the best that the world can offer with respect to benchmarks and places to begin, and where do we move innovatively from there. HSE is just another example of that. Again, I think out of necessity, we've been able to turn the dial up on that fast as a result of the reality that we were faced with, starting a few months ago. I do think that we've found that the rigor and the discipline associated with that is doable, and that's a good thing. And the quicker that becomes habit, the more reliable it becomes in terms of its end result, right? And I think that everybody involved in that as a topic, always understands that you can never have enough clarity of communication, and you can never be diligent enough in your commitment to the behaviors that if you really want to get the results. And so again, in a strange way, this has turned into an opportunity for us to forge a set of new habits in a way that hopefully will sort of seed in and become a new normal for us in a good way.
Speaking about building habits and creating opportunities, Mike, what in your opinion are the workplace trends that we are preparing, that we need to be ready for when 2021 finally turns the corner?
Yeah, so when we think about workplace, there's sort of two kinds of workplaces for us, right? There's our current workplace, where we're a development company and the beginning of an operating company, and that's sort of an office environment kind of question. But then there's the other workplace, which is when we are actually an operating company, and for us that means themed attractions and sports facilities and major events and all kinds of things, and that's a completely different sort of work environment. And on the second, I would say way too soon to tell, right? We're going to have to see what tomorrow looks like through the lens of maybe a year of practice. It will, if we're in a situation where there is a highly reliable vaccine, I think people's core tendencies and core sort of motivators in the area of entertainment, sports, and the arts will come back pretty quickly. It's pretty base for most people, and so if they can get it the way they got it before, they're going to want to get it that way again. And in that regard, we'll need to adapt to that. In the office environments, bit by bit, as I said, there's certain things that are clearly better and more efficient for us to do, and those are the things that are going to find long-term positions in the change of an environment. Interesting, we're in the beginning stage of now expanding our corporate headquarters into a new facility that we hope to occupy in a few months, and we're addressing this question: what do we need to do in the formation of that work environment to be predictive about like another thing like this, or what have we learned about a better environment over the course of the last 6 months that we should be thinking about for the next 6 years? Space certainly has something to do with that. I think that's true in the places that we live as well as the places that we work. The luxury of a little bit of space is kind of the reversal of a trend. And so net, you may have fewer people coming to the office every day, but if every one of those people that does come to the office requires a little bit more space, you may be right back in the same sort of amount of space per person that you were before. It'll just be different space than it was before. And so I think those are some of the things that we're likely to see, over time. Do I think this portends the end of the office building? Personally, I don't. for a lot of reasons. But I do think that there will be some adaptations to the nature of how the office environment is set up, as we look into the longer term future.
Greg, would you have a final message to share to those who are getting back in business in full swing and preparing to close 2020 and look forward to 2021?
Well, my starting thought would be we must all assume that 2021 is going to be better than 2020. I think that's a good place for all of us to start. I'm about to do my budget for next year, and that's the approach I'm taking, because if you think otherwise, you probably just should stay at home. So, assuming 2021 is better than 20, we're all busier. We're getting back to more normal behaviors. I think Mike makes a point which is valid around assuming we can get through the healthcare pandemic. There are aspects to our lives and lifestyles that people are going to get back to, whether it's sporting events, going to the theatre, a music concert, whatever it might be, holidays, travel. We will want to get back to those things. We've done them for so long. Whether we do them in the same, to the same extent, as frequently, that's the part we don't know. But I do think people will want to get back to those things. Mike's point on the office is one I actually agree with. We're going to have to make offices a place that people want to come to. An office has got to be a place where you can do things that you can't do at home. At home, you can write a report, you can do a spreadsheet, you can do a Teams call. So I think the utility of an office, the place that you'll come to interact, to coordinate, to have those interactions that you can't have at home, the office will have to become that environment. And I mean, the last thing for us is, and a big learning, we had this in place, I'd like to believe beforehand, is that when we trust people and we just let them continue doing what they're doing and we trust them to remain focused, keep on delivering, I think we've shown in the last 6 months what we're able to deliver. So I think if we go back to what we were doing in January, we'll have missed some valuable lessons that we can take into the future. So I think we have an opportunity now to try and figure out what was essential pre-pandemic that we need to get back to or want to get back to, but what from this period has served as well and we should continue doing. And that's, for me, the challenge for certainly the next 6 to 12 months.
Thank you so much, Greg and Mike, for joining us today on the panel. It's been quite an informative discussion. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy to do it.